Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Damon Chandler stood in his kitchen, watching the morning sun filter through expensive Italian blinds as he prepared coffee with military precision. Everything in his life appeared perfect. The sprawling suburban mansion in Connecticut, the successful security consulting business, and most importantly, his family. Patricia Chandler moved through their home like a queen surveying her domain, her auburn hair perfectly styled even at 7 in the morning. Their daughter Amber, now 16, had inherited her mother's striking features and her father's sharp intelligence. What Patricia didn't know was that her husband's security consulting was a carefully constructed cover. Damon Chandler had spent 15 years in black operations, working for agencies that didn't officially exist. He'd orchestrated regime changes, eliminated high-value targets, and mastered the art of making problems disappear permanently. 3 years ago, he'd retired from the shadows to build what he thought would be a normal life. "Daddy, can you drive me to school today?" Amber asked, bouncing into the kitchen with her backpack. She was the one pure thing in Damon's world, the reason he'd walked away from his previous life. "Of course, sweetheart," Damon replied, noting how Patricia barely acknowledged their daughter's presence. Lately, his wife seemed distracted, constantly checking her phone and making excuses to leave the house. As they drove to Amber's private school, she chattered about her upcoming debate tournament. Damon listened intently, filing away every detail. In his world, information was survival, and protecting Amber meant knowing everything about her life. "Mom's been acting weird lately," Amber mentioned casually as they pulled into the school's circular drive. "She's always texting someone and smiling in this strange way." A cold recognition settled in Damon's chest. He'd noticed the same behavioral changes in targets who were living double lives. "Has she mentioned any new friends?" he asked carefully. "She talks about her yoga instructor a lot. Some guy named Jonathan." Amber shrugged and grabbed her bag. "Love you, Dad." After dropping Amber off, Damon sat in his car for several minutes. Jonathan. He'd heard Patricia mention that name frequently over the past few months, always in passing, always casual. Too casual. That evening, while Patricia claimed to be at another yoga session, Damon activated skills he'd hoped never to use again. Her phone records revealed a pattern of calls and texts to Jonathan Loomis. Not a yoga instructor, but a high-profile divorce attorney with a reputation for ruthless tactics and expensive tastes. The surveillance footage Damon obtained showed Patricia entering the Marriott downtown every Tuesday and Thursday. The same hotel where Jonathan Loomis kept a permanent suite for client meetings. Damon watched the security feed on his laptop, seeing his wife of 18 years laugh as she kissed another man in the hotel elevator. The betrayal cut deep, but what triggered his transformation from loving husband to predator was the conversation he captured through his audio surveillance. "When are you going to leave him?" Jonathan's voice was clear through the sophisticated listening device Damon had planted in Patricia's purse. "Soon," Patricia replied. "I've been documenting everything. His work trips, his bank accounts, even his relationship with Amber. My lawyer says I can get everything in the divorce, including full custody." "Your lawyer?" Jonathan laughed. "Baby, I am your lawyer. And when this is over, you'll be a very wealthy single woman, and that little girl will finally have a real father figure." The rage that filled Damon wasn't the hot anger of a betrayed husband. It was the cold, calculating fury of a professional killer whose family had been threatened. They weren't just destroying his marriage. They were planning to steal his daughter. Chapter 2. The Hunter's Patience. 3 weeks passed, and Damon Chandler became a ghost in his own life. To Patricia and the outside world, he remained the devoted husband and father, but beneath the surface, he was conducting the most important operation of his career. He discovered that Jonathan Loomis had built his reputation on destroying families. The man specialized in high-net-worth divorces, using private investigators to dig up dirt on husbands while positioning himself as the sympathetic shoulder for wealthy wives to cry on. 3 of his previous clients had become his mistresses, and 2 had married him after their divorces were finalized, only to be discarded when younger, wealthier targets appeared. Patricia had no idea she was just another mark in Jonathan's predatory pattern. Damon's investigation revealed more disturbing details. Jonathan had convinced Patricia to start documenting concerning behavior from Damon, creating a false narrative of emotional abuse and neglect. Phone recordings showed Patricia practicing lies about Damon's temper, his work absences, and even fabricating incidents where he'd allegedly frightened Amber. The most damning discovery came when Damon hacked Jonathan's personal computer. Email chains revealed the lawyer's strategy. Paint Damon as an unstable veteran suffering from PTSD, use Patricia's testimony about his mysterious business trips to suggest dangerous criminal activity, and leverage Amber's testimony about her father's secretive behavior to justify removing her from his custody. But Jonathan had made a critical error. He'd underestimated exactly who Damon Chandler was. While Patricia thought she was manipulating her husband, Damon began creating his own narrative. He started leaving deliberate traces of his past, military commendations that suggested heroic service, business documents that painted him as a successful entrepreneur, and most importantly, he began building a network of allies. His first move was subtle. During a parent-teacher conference at Amber's school, Damon casually mentioned his concerns about Patricia's recent behavior to Dr. Sarah Mills, the school psychologist. He shared his worry that his wife might be having an affair and how it was affecting their daughter's academic performance. Amber's mentioned her mother's new yoga instructor. Dr. Mills noted, checking her files. She seems confused about why her mother needs so many private sessions. Damon's second move was even more calculated. He reached out to Martha Loomis, Jonathan's ex-wife, who had been financially devastated in their divorce 3 years earlier. What Damon learned from Martha would become the foundation of his revenge. He destroyed me systematically. Martha told Damon over coffee in a small diner outside the city. She was a broken woman, working 2 jobs to support herself while Jonathan lived in luxury. First, he made me dependent on him. Then he isolated me from my friends and family. When he was done with me, he took everything, my home, my business, even my dog. Martha revealed Jonathan's methods. He used private investigators to monitor his targets' husbands, planted surveillance equipment in their homes, and even hired actors to create compromising situations. The man wasn't just a divorce lawyer. He was running an elaborate con game that destroyed families for profit. He's done this to at least 6 women that I know of, Martha continued. Some of them lost their children too. He has judges in his pocket, investigators who will lie under oath, and therapists who will write whatever reports he needs. That night, Damon sat in his study, surrounded by files, photographs, and surveillance equipment. Patricia was upstairs, probably texting Jonathan about their next rendezvous. Amber was doing homework, innocent of the war being waged around her. Damon opened a secure laptop and typed a message to his former handler at the agency. Need a favor. Time to collect on old debts. The response came within minutes. Welcome back to the game, Reaper. What do you need? Reaper, his operational code name from the old days when his job was to eliminate problems that threatened national security. Now he had a more personal target, but the skills remained the same. Chapter 3. The Web Titans. The transformation in Damon's behavior was imperceptible to the casual observer, but Patricia began to notice subtle changes. He became more attentive, bringing her flowers and suggesting romantic dinners. To her, it seemed like her husband was finally trying to save their marriage, exactly what she needed to strengthen her case for emotional manipulation and control. What Patricia didn't realize was that Damon was gathering intelligence. During their romantic dinner at Le Bernardin, Patricia's favorite restaurant, Damon subtly guided the conversation toward their future. With a micro-recorder hidden in his cufflink, he captured Patricia admitting her dissatisfaction with their marriage, her desire for a more sophisticated lifestyle, and most damning, her belief that Amber would benefit from a more cultured father figure. Sometimes I wonder what our lives would be like if we'd made different choices, Patricia mused over wine, her guard down in the intimate setting. What kind of different choices? Damon asked, playing the role of the concerned husband perfectly. Well, you travel so much for work, and your business is so secretive. Amber barely knows what you do for a living. Don't you think she deserves stability? It was a rehearsed line, something Jonathan had clearly coached her to say. Damon filed it away with the dozens of other pieces of evidence he was collecting. Meanwhile, his network was providing him with intelligence on Jonathan's operation. His former agency contacts had identified the corrupt investigators, the compromised therapists, and most importantly, the 3 judges who had been influenced by Jonathan's money and connections. The revelation that changed everything came from an unexpected source, Amber herself. "Dad, can I ask you something weird?" she said one evening while they were working on her debate prep together. "Always, sweetheart." Mom's friend Jonathan came to pick her up yesterday when her car was being serviced. "He asked me a lot of strange questions about you, like whether you ever get angry, if you keep weapons in the house, stuff like that." It felt wrong. Damon's blood turned to ice. Jonathan was already positioning Amber as a witness against her own father. "Did he ask you anything else? He wanted to know about your work trips, if you ever seemed different when you came home. And he kept saying things like, 'You can tell me anything,' and sometimes adults have problems that kids notice first." Amber's intelligence shone through her confusion. "It felt like he was trying to get me to say bad things about you." That night, after Patricia claimed another evening yoga session, Damon made his decision. The planning phase was over. It was time to begin the offensive. His first strike was surgical. Using skills learned in Eastern Europe, Damon infiltrated Jonathan's law office after hours. He didn't steal anything or plant evidence. Instead, he installed undetectable surveillance equipment throughout the building and hacked into Jonathan's computer system. What he found was a digital goldmine. Files on Patricia and 5 other current targets, detailed strategies for manufacturing evidence, and most incredibly, recordings of Jonathan coaching his clients on how to lie under oath. But the most valuable discovery was Jonathan's personal calendar and communications. The man documented everything, including his plans for Patricia and Amber. According to Jonathan's notes, the timeline was accelerating. Patricia would file for divorce in 2 weeks, claiming emotional abuse and demanding full custody. Jonathan had already bribed Dr. Richard Steinberg, a family psychologist, to write a report declaring Damon unfit for parenthood. The corrupted therapist would cite Damon's secretive work, his military background suggesting violent tendencies, and Amber's obvious fear of her father. The custody hearing was scheduled for Judge Margaret Thornton's court, a woman who owed Jonathan significant gambling debts and had ruled in his favor in 14 consecutive cases. Reading these files, Damon felt the old familiar calm that preceded lethal action. Jonathan Loomis thought he was playing chess against an amateur, but he just declared war on someone who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of systematic destruction. The hunter had become the hunted, and Jonathan had no idea that his perfect life was about to become his worst nightmare. As Damon sat in Jonathan's chair, surrounded by the man's arrogance made manifest in expensive art and trophies from destroyed families, he allowed himself a cold smile. Tomorrow, he would begin turning Jonathan's own weapons against him. The war for his family was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Counterstrike. Jonathan Loomis prided himself on controlling every variable in his operations, but he had no idea that his latest target was already 3 moves ahead. While Jonathan prepared to destroy another family, Damon Chandler was quietly dismantling the lawyer's entire world. The first blow was delivered through Martha Loomis, Jonathan's ex-wife. Damon had spent weeks preparing her for this moment, providing her with evidence of Jonathan's pattern of predatory behavior and connecting her with other victims. Armed with documentation of his systematic fraud and abuse, Martha filed a civil lawsuit against her ex-husband for intentional infliction of emotional distress and fraudulent manipulation. But the real genius was in the timing. Martha's lawsuit was filed the same day Patricia was scheduled to meet with Dr. Steinberg, the corrupted psychologist Jonathan had bribed to write a damaging report about Damon. Jonathan's panic was captured on the surveillance equipment Damon had installed in his office. The lawyer frantically called his network of corrupt contacts, trying to understand how his carefully buried past was suddenly coming to light. "This is impossible," Jonathan shouted into his phone. "Martha doesn't have the resources for this kind of investigation." Someone's helping her. While Jonathan scrambled to contain the Martha situation, Damon struck again. Using his intelligence network, he'd identified Judge Margaret Thornton's gambling addiction and her massive debts to several illegal bookmakers. Rather than expose her directly, Damon arranged for one of her creditors to be arrested in an FBI sting operation. Facing federal charges, the bookie immediately offered to cooperate, providing federal investigators with detailed records of the judge's gambling debts and the favors she'd performed to pay them off. Judge Thornton would be under federal investigation within the week, making any custody decision she rendered immediately appealable. Patricia remained oblivious to the war raging around her. She continued her affair with Jonathan, believing their plan was proceeding smoothly. She'd already begun packing Damon's belongings in secret, convinced that within weeks she'd have the house, custody of Amber, and enough alimony to live comfortably with her new lover. What Patricia didn't know was that Damon had been documenting everything. Hidden cameras throughout their home captured her conversations with Jonathan, her attempts to hide assets, and most damning, her coaching sessions where Jonathan taught her to exaggerate and fabricate incidents of emotional abuse. But Damon's masterstroke was yet to come. Through his agency contacts, he learned that Dr. Richard Steinberg, the psychologist Jonathan had bribed, was already under investigation by the state licensing board for ethics violations. Rather than expose the bribe directly, Damon arranged for Steinberg to be presented with an irresistible opportunity to prove his corruption. Using a sophisticated sting operation, Damon's team posed as wealthy clients seeking Steinberg's services to fabricate evidence against an ex-husband in a custody battle. They offered him twice his usual fee and provided him with detailed instructions on exactly what lies they wanted in his report. Steinberg took the bait, accepting the money and agreeing to write a false psychological evaluation. What he didn't know was that every conversation was being recorded by the state's ethics investigators, who had been tipped off about his activities. The trap was closing on Jonathan's entire network, but the lawyer was too focused on his upcoming triumph with Patricia to notice the systematic destruction of his support system. Meanwhile, Amber was beginning to understand that something was seriously wrong in her family. Her mother's absences were becoming more frequent, and her strange interactions with Jonathan had made her deeply uncomfortable. "Dad, I need to tell you something," Amber said one evening as they walked their dog through the neighborhood. "I've been thinking about those questions Jonathan asked me, and I think he was trying to get me to lie about you." Damon stopped walking, kneeling to face his daughter. "What do you mean? He kept asking if you ever yell or if I'm scared of you." When I said no, he'd rephrase the questions like, "Surely there are times when your father's work stress makes him difficult to be around, or children often feel nervous around parents who have dangerous jobs." Amber's intelligence was evident in her analysis. It felt like he was trying to put words in my mouth. "You never have to be afraid to tell me the truth, Amber. About anything." "I know, Dad. And the truth is that Mom's been lying about where she goes. Jonathan makes me uncomfortable, and something bad is happening to our family." Tears filled her eyes. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" Damon pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling the weight of protecting her innocence while preparing for war. "I don't know what's going to happen, sweetheart, but I promise you that I will never let anyone hurt you or take you away from me. Never." That night, as Patricia attended another yoga session, Damon made his final preparations. Tomorrow, Jonathan would file the divorce papers, confident in his ability to destroy another family. What he didn't know was that Damon had already contacted the State Bar Association, the FBI, and the District Attorney's Office. The predator was about to become the prey. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. The morning Patricia served Damon with divorce papers should have been Jonathan Loomis's moment of triumph. Instead, it marked the beginning of his complete destruction. Damon accepted the papers with apparent shock and devastation, playing his role perfectly while Patricia delivered her rehearsed speech about needing space to find herself and wanting what's best for Amber. Jonathan waited in his Porsche outside, barely able to contain his smug satisfaction. What neither of them knew was that their every move was being monitored by federal agents who had been investigating Jonathan's network for the past 2 weeks, thanks to anonymous tips provided through Damon's intelligence contacts. The first domino fell that afternoon when Dr. Richard Steinberg was arrested at his practice. The state licensing board, working with federal prosecutors, charged him with fraud, bribery, and ethics violations. His confession, delivered within hours of his arrest, implicated Jonathan as the source of multiple bribes over 3 years. Judge Margaret Thornton received the second blow. Federal investigators arrived at her chambers with evidence of her gambling debts and the favors she'd performed to pay them off. Facing federal corruption charges, she recused herself from all of Jonathan's pending cases and agreed to cooperate with investigators. But Jonathan was still unaware of the trap closing around him. He spent the evening celebrating with Patricia at their usual hotel suite, planning their future together while federal agents compiled evidence for his arrest. "By tomorrow, you'll be free of that boring husband of yours," Jonathan told Patricia as they shared champagne. "And by next month, we'll have full custody of Amber and enough of his money to live exactly how we want." Their celebration was interrupted by Jonathan's phone buzzing with panic calls from his associates. Dr. Steinberg's arrest was making local news, and the corruption investigation was widening. "This is just a coincidence," Jonathan assured Patricia, though his confidence was wavering. "Steinberg was always reckless. It has nothing to do with us." Patricia, naive about the true nature of Jonathan's operation, believed him. She returned home late that night, finding Damon sitting in his study with legal documents spread across his desk. "Already looking for a lawyer?" she asked with false sweetness. "You should know that I've documented everything, Damon. Your secretive work, your long absences, your inability to be a proper father to Amber." Damon looked up at his wife, this woman he'd loved, who had chosen to betray not just him, but their daughter, and felt nothing but cold calculation. "I'm sure you have, Patricia. Just like I'm sure you believe Jonathan loves you." Something in his tone made Patricia's confidence flicker. "What's that supposed to mean? Did he tell you about Martha? Or Sandra Williams? Or Jennifer Chun?" Damon named Jonathan's previous victims, watching Patricia's face pale. "Did he mention that you're the fourth woman he's convinced to divorce her husband using the exact same strategy?" "You're lying," Patricia whispered, but doubt was creeping into her voice. "Martha Loomis filed a lawsuit against Jonathan yesterday. She has evidence of his pattern. Seduce the wife, destroy the husband, steal the assets, then move on to the next target. You're not special, Patricia. You're just next in line." The fear in Patricia's eyes was evident, but she'd gone too far to turn back. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. I'm still divorcing you, and I'm still getting custody of Amber." "No," Damon said quietly, "you're not." The next morning brought Jonathan's world crashing down. Federal agents arrested him at his office on charges of bribery, fraud, and operating a criminal enterprise. The arrest was coordinated with raids on his associates' offices and homes, seizing computers, files, and financial records. Patricia watched the news coverage in horror, seeing her lover led away in handcuffs while reporters detailed the scope of his criminal operation. Her phone buzzed with calls from Jonathan's law firm, informing her that all his cases were being transferred to other attorneys due to ethical complications. But Damon wasn't finished. While Patricia struggled to process Jonathan's arrest, she received a visit from Detective Sarah Chun of the Connecticut State Police. The detective had some very interesting questions about Patricia's relationship with Jonathan and her involvement in fabricating evidence for their divorce case. "We have recordings, Mrs. Chandler," Detective Chun explained gently. "Conversations between you and Mr. Loomis, where you discuss creating false narratives about your husband's behavior. We also have video evidence of you meeting with Dr. Steinberg to coordinate your testimony." Patricia's world imploded as she realized the scope of the trap that had closed around her. She wasn't just losing her divorce case. She was facing criminal charges for conspiracy and perjury. "I want to speak to my lawyer," Patricia said shakily. "That might be difficult," Detective Chin replied. "Your lawyer is currently in federal custody." As Patricia was led away for questioning, Amber watched from her bedroom window, finally understanding why her father had seemed so calm despite their family falling apart. Her mother hadn't just betrayed her father. She'd been willing to lie about him in court to steal Amber away from the parent who truly loved her. That evening, Damon found Amber sitting on the porch, staring at the empty space where Patricia's car usually parked. "Is she coming back?" Amber asked. "I don't know," Damon answered honestly. "But if she does, it will be to face the consequences of her choices." "Good," Amber said quietly. "Because what she did to you, to us, is unforgivable." Looking at his daughter, Damon saw the same steel that ran through his own veins. The betrayal had hurt her deeply, but it had also taught her a valuable lesson about loyalty and justice. The predator had been caught. Now came the reckoning. Chapter 6. The Reckoning Begins. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the most scandalous divorce case in Connecticut's recent history was about to begin. Patricia Chandler sat at the defendant's table with her court-appointed attorney, an overwhelmed public defender named Kevin Nash, who had inherited the case after Jonathan's arrest. Jonathan Loomis, facing federal charges, sat in shackles at a separate table, his expensive suits replaced by an orange jumpsuit. The media had dubbed it the Predator lawyer case, and every seat in the gallery was filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and most importantly, Jonathan's previous victims who had come to watch his downfall. But the real shock came when Judge Harold Morrison called the court to order and Damon Chandler walked through the courtroom doors. Gone was the suburban businessman persona. Damon wore a perfectly tailored black suit, and behind him walked a legal team that made Jonathan's former associates look like amateurs. Leading them was Victoria Cross, one of the most feared family law attorneys on the East Coast, known for her ruthless tactics and undefeated record in high-profile custody cases. "Your Honor," Victoria announced, "we're here to respond to the divorce petition filed by Mrs. Chandler and to present our counterpetition for divorce on grounds of adultery, fraud, and conspiracy." Patricia's court-appointed attorney looked overwhelmed as boxes of evidence were wheeled into the courtroom. This wasn't the slam-dunk case Jonathan had promised her. But the real surprise was yet to come. As the proceedings began, Judge Morrison made an unusual announcement. "Before we proceed, I need to address an extraordinary situation. Mr. Chandler, would you please approach the bench?" Damon stood and walked forward with military precision. What happened next sent shockwaves through the courtroom. "Colonel Chandler," Judge Morrison said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "thank you for your service to our country. Your security clearance has been verified by the appropriate authorities." The title hung in the air like a thunderbolt. Colonel, not the mysterious businessman Patricia had tried to portray as unstable, but a military officer with the highest security clearances. Jonathan's face went white as he began to understand exactly who he had tried to destroy. Patricia stared in shock. In 18 years of marriage, she had never known her husband's true rank or the nature of his service. She had assumed he was some mid-level security consultant, not a highly decorated military officer whose work was classified at the highest levels. Victoria Cross smiled as she opened her first file. "Your Honor, we'd like to present evidence of Mrs. Chandler's conspiracy with Mr. Loomis to defraud the court and manufacture false evidence against my client." The evidence was devastating. Audio recordings of Patricia and Jonathan planning to lie under oath, video surveillance of their meetings with the corrupt psychologist, and most damning, Patricia's own voice describing how they would manipulate Amber into testifying against her father. In this recording, Victoria announced, playing audio through the courtroom speakers, "We hear Mrs. Chandler and Mr. Loomis discussing how to coach the minor child to make false statements about her father's behavior." Patricia's voice filled the courtroom. "Amber trusts her father completely, so we'll need to be subtle. Maybe suggest that his work makes him dangerous. Plant some doubts about his activities." Jonathan's voice followed. "Children are easily manipulated. A few leading questions, some suggestions about what real fathers are like, and she'll start seeing him differently." The words hung in the air like poison. Patricia had been willing to psychologically manipulate her own daughter to win a custody battle. Amber, now 17 and sitting in the gallery, listened to her mother's betrayal with tears streaming down her face. The woman she had loved and trusted had been prepared to destroy her relationship with her father for money. But Damon wasn't finished. Victoria Cross presented evidence of Patricia's attempts to hide marital assets, her coordination with Jonathan to defraud the court, and most shocking, her knowledge of Jonathan's pattern of destroying other families. Mrs. Chandler wasn't an innocent victim, Victoria stated. She was a willing co-conspirator who understood exactly what kind of man she was partnering with. Kevin Nash, Patricia's overwhelmed attorney, tried desperately to salvage his client's position. "Your Honor, my client was manipulated by a professional predator." "Objection," Victoria interrupted. "Evidence shows Mrs. Chandler was warned about Mr. Loomis's pattern by multiple sources, including her own daughter, and chose to proceed anyway." The trial continued for 3 days, each session bringing new revelations about the depth of Patricia and Jonathan's conspiracy. Former victims testified about Jonathan's methods, while federal prosecutors presented evidence of the broader criminal enterprise. On the final day, Damon himself took the stand. His testimony was precise, controlled, and devastating. "I love my wife," he said simply. "I trusted her with my life, my secrets, and most importantly, our daughter. Her betrayal wasn't just personal. It was an attack on the most fundamental bonds of family and loyalty." "Mr. Chandler," Patricia's attorney asked during cross-examination, "isn't it possible that your wife simply fell out of love and wanted a different life?" Damon's eyes fixed on the lawyer with a cold stare that had once intimidated international terrorists. Falling out of love doesn't require destroying another person. It doesn't require lying under oath or manipulating a child. There are honorable ways to end a marriage. This wasn't one of them. When the judge finally rendered his decision, it was swift and merciless. Patricia would receive no alimony, no marital assets beyond her personal belongings, and no custody rights. Furthermore, she would face criminal charges for perjury and conspiracy. Jonathan received an additional 10 years on his federal sentence for his attempt to suborn perjury and obstruct justice in the custody case. As the courtroom emptied, Patricia approached Damon one final time. "Please," she whispered, "I made a mistake. I was stupid and selfish, but I'm still Amber's mother." Damon looked at the woman who had once been the center of his world and felt nothing but cold indifference. "You stopped being her mother the moment you decided to use her as a weapon against me. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, Patricia. Some choices can't be undone. The war was over. The predators had been destroyed. But for Damon Chandler, the reckoning was just beginning." Chapter 7. Aftermath and Revelations. 6 months after the trial, Damon Chandler sat in his home office reviewing files that would have given most people nightmares. The systematic destruction of Jonathan Loomis's criminal network had revealed a web of corruption spanning 3 states and involving dozens of accomplices. Federal prosecutors had filed charges against 17 additional defendants, including 2 judges, 5 lawyers, 3 private investigators, and 7 mental health professionals who had participated in Jonathan's scheme to destroy families for profit. The total number of families victimized over the past decade was staggering: 43 divorces, 28 custody battles, and millions of dollars in stolen assets. But for Damon, the statistics were meaningless. What mattered was that the predators who had threatened his family were facing justice, and more importantly, that other families would be protected from their schemes. Amber had grown stronger through the ordeal, though the betrayal by her mother had left deep scars. Now 17 and preparing for college, she had chosen to legally change her name to remove any connection to Patricia. She would be Amber Chandler exclusively, carrying only her father's name. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," Amber said one evening as they shared dinner in their now quiet home. "Mom tried to contact me last week." Damon set down his fork, his expression remaining carefully neutral. "What did she want?" "She's getting out of prison next month. She wants to meet, to explain everything, and ask for forgiveness." Amber's voice was steady, but Damon could see the pain in her eyes. "She said she's changed, that she's gotten therapy and understands how wrong she was." "What did you tell her?" "Nothing." I didn't respond. Amber looked directly at her father. "But I wanted to ask you something. Do you think people can really change? Do you think she deserves a chance to make amends?" Damon considered his answer carefully. This was one of the most important conversations he would ever have with his daughter, and he wanted to be honest without poisoning her against the possibility of forgiveness in general. "Some people can change," he said slowly, People can learn from their mistakes, grow from their experiences, and become better than they were. But there's a difference between making a mistake and making a choice to hurt people you're supposed to protect. You mean the difference between accidentally hurting someone and intentionally betraying them? Exactly. Your mother didn't accidentally have an affair. She didn't accidentally conspire to fabricate evidence against me. She didn't accidentally agree to manipulate you into lying under oath. Those were deliberate choices made over months with full knowledge of the consequences. Amber nodded slowly. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it didn't happen. Forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for the person who hurt you, Damon explained. It's about letting go of anger so it doesn't poison your own life. But forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. You can forgive someone while still protecting yourself from their ability to hurt you again. So you're saying I could forgive Mom without letting her back in my life? I'm saying that whatever you decide about your relationship with your mother is entirely your choice. I won't influence you either way. But I will say this. If you choose to have contact with her, it should be on your terms, at your pace, and with clear boundaries about what you will and won't accept. That night, Amber wrote a letter to her mother. It was a carefully crafted message that demonstrated the maturity forced upon her by her mother's betrayal. Asterisk Mom, I receive your messages asking to meet. I've thought about it carefully, and I'm not ready for that conversation. What you did didn't just hurt Dad, it hurt me. You were willing to destroy my relationship with my father to get what you wanted. You were prepared to use me as a weapon in your war against him. I don't hate you, but I don't trust you either. Trust has to be earned, and earning it takes time and consistent actions, not just words and apologies. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what you have to say. But that day isn't today, and it might not be for a long time. In the meantime, I'm building a life based on honesty, loyalty, and the values Dad taught me. If you really have changed, then you'll respect my decision and give me the space I need to heal. Amber asterisk. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Jonathan's downfall continued to spread. Martha Loomis, his ex-wife, had used her settlement from the civil lawsuit to start a foundation that helped other victims of predatory divorce attorneys. She regularly appeared on legal talk shows, warning people about the signs of manipulation and fraud in family law cases. 3 documentary filmmakers had approached Damon about telling his story, but he had declined. His victory was personal, not public, and he had no interest in fame or recognition. What he did accept was an invitation to speak at a closed session for family court judges about recognizing and preventing manipulation tactics in custody cases. His presentation, based on his experience with Jonathan's operation, had led to new protocol for investigating suspicious patterns in divorce proceedings. Dr. Sarah Mills, Amber's former school psychologist, had also reached out to Damon. She was developing training materials for school counselors to help them identify when children were being coached to make false allegations against parents. Your daughter's intelligence and emotional stability probably saved her from being successfully manipulated, Dr. Mills told Damon during one of their consultations. But many children aren't as strong or perceptive as Amber. They believe what adults tell them to believe. The comment reminded Damon of something Jonathan had said during one of their recorded conversations. Children are easily manipulated. It was a predator's mindset, viewing a child's trust as a weakness to be exploited rather than a bond to be protected. As the first anniversary of his divorce approached, Damon reflected on the choices that had led to this point. He had used skills learned in warfare to protect his family, and while the methods had been ruthless, the cause had been just. Patricia was scheduled for release from prison in 3 weeks. Jonathan would remain incarcerated for another 8 years, his law license permanently revoked, and his assets seized to compensate his victims. The predators had been destroyed, but Damon remained vigilant. In his world, threats could emerge from anywhere, and the most dangerous ones often came from those closest to you. He had learned to trust carefully and forgive never. It was a hard lesson, but it had saved his family. Chapter 8. The Final Confrontation. Patricia Chandler was released from the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution on a cold Tuesday morning in November, 18 months after her arrest. She had served her time quietly, completing mandatory therapy sessions and writing lengthy letters to Amber that went unanswered. Her release attracted no media attention. The scandal had faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer outrages and fresher betrayals. She emerged from prison with nothing but a small bag of personal belongings and a bus ticket to a halfway house in Hartford. What Patricia didn't know was that her every move was being monitored. Damon had maintained surveillance on all of Jonathan's co-conspirators, and Patricia was no exception. He wanted to ensure she posed no threat to Amber's peace of mind or his own security. For 3 weeks, Patricia followed the strict guidelines of her parole. She attended mandated counseling sessions, worked part-time at a nonprofit organization helping other former inmates, and lived quietly in the supervised housing facility. To outside observers, she appeared to be a woman genuinely trying to rebuild her life. But Damon's surveillance revealed a different truth. Patricia was carefully rebuilding her network, reconnecting with old friends, and gradually working toward a specific goal: regaining contact with Amber. The first attempt was subtle. Patricia contacted Amber's high school, claiming to be updating her emergency contact information as the girl's mother. When that failed, due to security protocols Damon had established, she tried reaching out through Amber's friends on social media. Each attempt was documented, each failure adding to Patricia's growing desperation. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in December. Amber was shopping at the mall with friends when Patricia simply appeared beside her at a cosmetics counter, as if their meeting was coincidental. "Amber, sweetheart," Patricia said softly, her voice trembling with carefully practiced emotion. "I've missed you so much." Amber froze, her friends immediately sensing the tension. Patricia looked older, thinner, and there was a brittle quality to her appearance that spoke of desperation barely held in check. "I wrote you letters," Patricia continued, moving closer despite Amber's obvious discomfort. "I know you probably didn't read them, but I've changed. I've had time to think about what I did, and I understand now how wrong I was. Please leave me alone," Amber said quietly, her voice steady despite the shock of the encounter. "I'm your mother," Patricia said, tears beginning to flow. "I made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your mother. Doesn't that mean anything?" Several shoppers had stopped to watch the drama unfolding, their phones discreetly recording what appeared to be a heartbroken mother pleading with her daughter. "You stopped being my mother when you decided to use me as a weapon against Dad," Amber replied, her voice carrying the steel that Damon recognized as his own. "You were willing to manipulate me into lying under oath. You were prepared to destroy my relationship with the one parent who actually loved me." Patricia's composure cracked slightly. "I was confused, manipulated by Jonathan. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to record practice sessions where you rehearsed lies about Dad. You were thinking clearly enough to meet with that psychologist and plan exactly what you wanted me to say." Amber's voice remained steady, but her friends could see the pain in her eyes. "I heard the recordings, Mom. I heard you laughing about how easy it would be to turn me against him." The public nature of the confrontation was working against Patricia. What she had planned as an emotional ambush designed to guilt Amber into reconciliation was instead revealing her desperation and the depth of her daughter's justified anger. "I can change," Patricia whispered. "I have changed. I just need a chance to prove it to you." "No," Amber said simply. "You had 18 years to be my mother. You chose to throw that away for money and a man who was using you just like he used all his other victims. Some choices have permanent consequences." The finality in Amber's voice was unmistakable. Patricia realized that her daughter, now 18 and legally an adult, had made a decision that no court could overturn. Security guards, alerted by concerned shoppers, began approaching the group. Patricia had one last card to play. "Your father has poisoned you against me," she said, her voice turning bitter. "He's filled your head with lies and turned you into a weapon against your own mother. Can't you see that he's manipulating you just like—" "Stop." Amber's voice cut through Patricia's words like a blade. "Dad never said a single negative word about you. Not once. Even after everything you did, he told me that whatever I decided about our relationship was my choice. He protected me from the truth about what you really are." Patricia stared at her daughter, seeing not the malleable child she remembered, but a young woman who had inherited her father's strength and moral clarity. "But I will tell you what Dad never would," Amber continued. "You're not a victim. You're not a woman who made mistakes. You're a predator who is willing to sacrifice your own child for money. And predators don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are." The security guards reached them just as Patricia's facade finally crumbled completely. The practiced remorse disappeared, replaced by the narcissistic rage that had always lurked beneath her surface charm. "Fine," she hissed, her voice low enough that only Amber could hear. "Enjoy your perfect life with your perfect father. But remember this moment, because someday you're going to need me, and I won't be there." Amber looked at the woman who had given birth to her and felt nothing but pity. "I stopped needing you the day I realized you were willing to betray me for money. Goodbye, Mom." As security escorted Patricia from the mall, Amber's friends surrounded her with support and concern. But Amber felt surprisingly calm. The confrontation she had dreaded for months was over, and she had discovered something important about herself. She was stronger than her mother's betrayal. That evening, she told Damon about the encounter. He listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing of the cold fury building inside him. "Are you okay?" he asked when she finished. "Actually, yes," Amber said, sounding surprised by her own response. "I thought seeing her would be harder, but it wasn't. She looked so small, desperate. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, until she tried to blame you for turning me against her. That's when I realized she still doesn't understand what she did wrong. She still thinks she's the victim." Damon nodded slowly. Patricia's confrontation with Amber had revealed that prison had changed nothing about her fundamental character. She remained a narcissist who viewed others as objects to be manipulated for her benefit. "What happens now?" Amber asked. "Now? Nothing. You handle that perfectly," and she got the answer she needed to hear. Damon paused, choosing his words carefully. "But if she violates her parole by continuing to harass you, there will be consequences." The threat was quietly delivered, but absolutely serious. Patricia had been warned away from his daughter through official channels. If she chose to ignore those warnings, Damon would respond with the same ruthless efficiency he had used to destroy Jonathan's criminal enterprise. The predator had been given one last chance to walk away. Whether she was smart enough to take it remained to be seen. Chapter 9. The Price of Betrayal. Spring arrived in Connecticut with unusual warmth, and Amber Chandler was preparing for her high school graduation when Patricia made her final, fatal mistake. Unable to accept her daughter's rejection and desperate to salvage some connection to her former life, Patricia had been escalating her attempts at contact. She sent gifts that were returned unopened, hired a private investigator to photograph Amber at school, and finally, in an act of pure desperation, she appeared at Amber's graduation ceremony. Damon spotted Patricia immediately as she tried to blend into the crowd of families celebrating their children's achievements. She was thinner than during their mall encounter, her appearance suggesting someone who was not coping well with her new reality. "Dad," Amber whispered, having noticed her mother's presence as well. "What should I do?" "Nothing," Damon replied calmly. "Enjoy your graduation. Don't let her steal this moment from you." But Patricia had no intention of remaining a passive observer. As Amber walked across the stage to receive her diploma, Patricia stood and began applauding loudly, calling out, "That's my daughter," in a voice designed to carry across the entire auditorium. The disruption was brief but effective. Hundreds of heads turned toward Patricia, and several people began recording the scene with their phones. Amber's moment of triumph was being hijacked by her mother's desperate need for attention and acknowledgement. Security moved to escort Patricia from the venue, but the damage was done. The confrontation made local news as convicted felon disrupts daughter's graduation, complete with background details about the divorce scandal and Jonathan's criminal enterprise. For Amber, seeing her private pain turned into public entertainment was the final straw. That evening, she made a decision that would end Patricia's harassment permanently. "I want to file a restraining order," Amber told Damon, "and I want her to know that any future contact will result in criminal charges." Damon helped his daughter navigate the legal process, but he also took additional steps. Through his network of contacts, He ensured that Patricia's parole officer was fully briefed on her violations and that her continued harassment of Amber was documented in federal databases. What Patricia didn't know was that her disruption at graduation had been filmed from multiple angles. Combined with security footage of her stalking behavior at the mall and evidence of her hiring a private investigator to surveil Amber, federal prosecutors had sufficient grounds to revoke her parole. 3 days after graduation, Patricia was arrested at her halfway house on charges of violating her parole conditions. She would serve the remainder of her original sentence, 18 months, in federal prison. But even facing a return to incarceration, Patricia remained delusional about her victim status. In a final interview with local media, she portrayed herself as a mother being cruelly separated from her child by a vindictive ex-husband and an ungrateful daughter. "He's turned her against me," Patricia told a reporter, tears flowing on cue. "I made mistakes, but I've paid for them. How long does a mother have to suffer for loving her child?" The interview aired once and was immediately buried by the station's legal team after Damon's attorneys pointed out the defamatory nature of Patricia's claims. More importantly, the interview demonstrated that Patricia had learned nothing from her experiences and remained committed to portraying herself as the victim rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. Amber watched the interview and felt something shift inside her. The last vestiges of daughterly love finally died. The woman on screen wasn't her mother anymore. She was just a stranger who shared some DNA and a lot of delusions. "I'm done," Amber told Damon after the interview. "Not just with her contact attempts or her manipulation. I'm done feeling guilty about not wanting a relationship with her. I'm done wondering if I should give her another chance. I'm done being sad about losing the mother I thought I had." Damon recognized the moment for what it was. His daughter had finally completed the journey from victim to survivor. The betrayal that had once threatened to destroy their family had instead forged her into someone stronger and more self-aware than most people twice her age. The final chapter of Patricia's story played out without drama. She served her additional prison time quietly, her dreams of reconciliation with Amber finally abandoned. Upon her release, she moved to Florida using her maiden name, working at a chain restaurant and living in a small apartment far from the privileged life she had once enjoyed. Jonathan Loomis died in federal prison during his 7th year of incarceration, the victim of violence from other inmates who didn't appreciate predators who targeted families. His death was barely noted in the legal community, and no one attended his funeral except a court-appointed representative. Dr. Steinberg lost his license permanently and worked as a night shift security guard at a shopping mall. Judge Thornton was disbarred and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The network of corruption that had enabled Jonathan's predatory scheme was systematically dismantled, with dozens of careers and reputations destroyed in the process. For the victims, justice was finally served. Martha Loomis's foundation had helped recover millions of dollars in stolen assets and provided support for families destroyed by predatory lawyers. New protocols in family courts made it significantly harder for corrupt attorneys to manipulate the system. But for Damon Chandler, the true victory was simpler and more personal. On a warm evening in June, he sat on his porch watching Amber pack for college, her future bright with possibility because she had learned the difference between love and manipulation, between loyalty and betrayal. She was heading to Stanford with a full scholarship, planning to study psychology with a focus on helping children who had been manipulated by predatory adults. The trauma that had once threatened to destroy her had instead given her a mission and a strength that would serve her throughout her life. "Any regrets?" Amber asked her father as she carried boxes to his car. Damon considered the question seriously. The methods he had used to destroy Patricia and Jonathan had been ruthless and unforgiving. He had shown no mercy to those who had threatened his family, and he never would. "None," he said simply. "Some people mistake mercy for weakness and forgiveness for invitation. Your mother and Jonathan learned that some betrayals have permanent consequences." "Good," Amber replied, her voice carrying the same steel that had made her father legendary in his previous profession. Because what they did was unforgivable. As they drove toward Amber's future, Damon reflected on the lessons learned from their ordeal. Trust was a gift that should be given carefully and withdrawn permanently when violated. Loyalty was the foundation of all meaningful relationships. And sometimes, the greatest act of love was the complete destruction of those who threatened the people you were sworn to protect. The predators had been eliminated. Justice had been served. And the bonds between a father and daughter had been forged stronger than steel in the fires of betrayal and survival. In the end, that was all that mattered.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.